The stats you presented in the video are wrong. Now, when I presented all those stats taken mostly from Roy Ng's blog, I will fully admit that I'm not completely sure what those stats mean. For example, I mentioned income inequality, but I have absolutely no idea about economics or how income inequality is calculated. But what I did understand is the concept that if the rich becomes richer and the poor has a harder time to make ends meet, that's a bad thing. So that was enough for me to claim that there was a problem in terms of the monetary welfare of citizens. You see, when you mention specific terms about a complex topic, you give the impression that you actually know a lot about that topic, when in most cases you usually don't. Or maybe I really do know a lot, just that I don't give myself enough credit. I don't know, I don't go to school, so really every day I'm just learning. Roy Ng actually knows his stuff. He did a lot of meticulous research. Me, I just use it and take all the credit. I'm like the guy who invented the telephone. And of course, since the stats were taken primarily from one source, you could make the argument that it is unreliable and biased. But so far, from all the comments I have read, I have not seen a single one that has proven that the facts I presented in that video was wrong. So lucky me, Roy did a very good job. If you do have proofs that those facts are wrong, feel free to provide it to me. I would like to see it. You see, it's one thing to say something, it's another to actually prove it. You are exploiting your freedom of speech. How do you exploit freedom of speech? You either have it or you don't. There is no relative freedom of speech meter that is contingent on the amount of controversy that you create. Now, people like to consider me as a freedom of speech advocate, but if you realize initially, I didn't even fight for freedom of speech. I just thought it was there. And if we were to follow the Constitution, I would have the right to say things that piss people off and be immune to any legal action. What you instead chose to do was to send me to jail. And you know what sucks? The main thing people were pissed off about was that I insulted Lee Kuan Yew. But I wasn't punished for that. Instead, I got the heaviest punishment for the few seconds I insulted Jesus. They initially charged me for intending to cause distress to the public for insulting Lee Kuan Yew, but quite inexplicably, they eventually withdrew the charge. That's just great. I feel like Einstein when he won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect instead of the general theory of relativity. Opposition supporters keep on making it seem like I was imprisoned because I insulted Lee Kuan Yew. I really wasn't, at least legally. It was for obscene image and intending to promote ill will amongst religious groups. It's easier for Han Hui and Roy Ng to discuss how much the government sucks instead of discussing whether or not God exists, though it is reasonable to make the claim that criticizing Harry was the greatest factor that got me to be charged. We're mainly pissed off that he insulted Lee Kuan Yew, but we do not have enough legal grounds to punish him for that, so let's instead punish him for some other factors so we can portray to the public that you will be severely punished if you dare to criticize the government. Striking fear, it's what we communists do. And in my case, there was no school to punish me, no job to lose, and I am not an overly sensitive teenager that will be emotionally traumatized by the comments of a multitude of idiots. So the only way that you can fuck with me is if you use the law, even though in every other case, you never ever did so. I recall that there was an entire Facebook page where the DP was an homage to my obscene image, where I am butt-fucking my mother. I don't think the guy who made that needs to plead guilty. And of course, there are previous cases of Amy Chung and Jason Yeo, whom using my case as a reference, also made comments that can be considered harassment. None of them were charged though. So really, their choice to imprison someone is not based on harassment or sedition, or whether or not it offends religious groups, or whether or not the image is obscene. They do so because they feel like it. It's not based on a law, it's based on what they think. There really isn't any freedom of speech. Now I speculate that in some point in time, the prosecutors started to regret their decision to charge me, because seeing how I continued to criticize religion in my blog and they didn't do anything, It's quite obvious. You thought that I would just plead guilty and go on probation, and that would teach fellow citizens of Singapore a lesson about criticizing your own government. You didn't know that I would break the terms of the bail, have thoughts of suicide, and that Hong Kong would burn Lee Hsien Loong's face. But you couldn't back away in the middle of it, because then you would have to admit that you were wrong. And that's just something you can't do. So following in the footsteps of Lee Kuan Yew, let's not do things based on the consistency of the law, but whenever it seems beneficial to do so. At least now, though, I know what I still can do, and that is criticize the government. That's technically still legal. So stay tuned. Unless, of course, you try to send me back to jail again, in which case I wish you very good luck for the elections.